notes in case I get questions.
Actualmente, John se desempeña como asesor estratégico de la iniciativa de desarrollo verde de la UICN. John además lidera el proyecto de negocios y servicios ecosistémicos del Instituto de Recursos Mundiales. Ayuda a los sectores corporativos a desarrollar estrategias políticas de mercados para los recursos ecosistémicos. En este caso, fue coautor de la revisión de servicios ecosistémicos y contribuyó a la guía corporativa para la valoración de servicios ecosistémicos y del además, llevó toda la valoración bueno, tiene una larga experiencia en la América, en Indonesia, en el Pacífico Sur, donde trabajó en diferentes áreas, como en el sector de la agricultura, la silvicultura, el turismo, la reducción de la pobreza, la participación, el desarrollo de empresas y la gestión de cadenas de valor. Con estas capacidades de desarrollar alianzas con empresas dentro de la construcción para reducir el riesgo y incentivar nuevas oportunidades para también productores y empresarios. Lo tengo con John. Pues es importante que se la tenga una charla estructurada con las cosas de John, pero lo que quisiera con esto es mucha interacción con ustedes, porque es un poquito como un trabajo de los pues, resultados también es una
Muchas gracias. Gracias por su tiempo. Había un vez cuando pude trabajar en español, pero ahora mi muy bajo. If it's all right, can I speak in English? That would be all right. I guess I got to know a little bit about Humboldt University when I met Brigitte at a conference in Cartagena in October, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We've started doing work in Colombia, mostly in the Cartagena area in Baru. I'm curious to talk a little bit about that. I'm starting to do more work in Colombia. Also, last week I was at a conference called Community of Ecosystem Service in Washington, D.C., and there was a lot of discussion there about natural capital accounting, about remote sensing, about mapping of biodiversity service. I'd be curious to share some of the things I learned there and get your ideas about its applicability here in Colombia and elsewhere, and also a little bit about some of the work we're doing. Get an idea of just to learn some about. But before I start, I just heard a little bit about my background. I'm curious just to get a sense of people in the room, what it is that you're all working on. So how many of you are doing work with private sector, with companies? So, voy a buscar la mano por mañana. Okay, y otros están solo en the others that you're working mostly with science-based research or?
Government.
Okay. Great. And on the phone, just kind of curious who's out there, and So can everyone on the phone hear me? Can anyone on the phone hear me? Hay unas personas por teléfono.
¿Puedes preguntar algo? Uy, que está bien. Sí. A ver. Aló. Aló.
While they're getting started, working that out, just talk a little bit about sustainable flows, who we are, some of the work that we're doing on natural capital valuation, as well as again we can talk about some ideas for collaboration. At least I'd like to get a sense from you on some of the ideas that we have. So sustainable flows was formed primarily out of some friendships that were developed at the World Resources Institute, WRI. I presume everyone in the room, are you familiar with the World Resources Institute? WRI? WRI did the greenhouse gas protocols. There's a lot of work with the World Business Council on sustainable development. That helped launch the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. I did a lot of the follow-up on the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. The microphone is working. I'm just kind of curious to get a sense of people who are on the phone, what their expertise is, what they're working on.
Aló, das people communication team, they are connected.
Okay.
Entonces, ¿qué nos puede conectar?
When I was at the World Resources Institute, most of my work was geared towards trying to take the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment and translate it for corporations to help them understand what ecosystem services are and how they relate to their operations. While I was there, we did some work with the World Business Council to develop the ESR, the Corporate Ecosystem Services Review. We also wrote the guide to corporate ecosystem valuation. And we've been continuing that work, taking that work forward with corporations. We also do a lot of work with public sector as well, with governments, both national and regional. Now, this is sort of the different areas that we work in. Most of our work sort of touches on modeling, valuation, and then risk management. And trying to really link these things together and finding the right application for the right decision. This is our team. We're about 2.5 years old. We have a very, very small team. The modeling team consists of Stephen Stahl. He's based in Miami. He's an ecological modeler. He's done a lot of work with marine ecosystems and agent-based modeling. So trying to create models that integrate both ecological processes and economic processes. I'll show you some of that work. Michael Ravick, he's based in Bucaramanga. He spent 2 years. He's also a modeler and mathematician. He spent several years in the U.S. Doing postdoctoral work with Barnes Livermore Laboratories and other national laboratories in the U.S. Around modeling of ecological and geological processes. He spent 2 years at Ecopetrol and independent researcher and teacher at a university of Bucaramanga. A lot of his work is on the ecological side, on the terrestrial side. Jeffrey and Anthony. Jeffrey is Colombian. He was Medellin. He's now based in Tampa, Florida. He's an economist. Mostly did most of his work in marine evaluation of marine ecosystems. Currently doing a lot of work in valuation of urban ecosystems in Africa with some work we have there, as well as he was one of the co-authors of the Guide to Corporate Ecosystem Valuation. He has a lot of experience with corporations. Anthony spent several years at WRI, also at the United Nations Statistics Division. Statistics Division is working with the WAVES program on natural capital valuation. And I know that Colombia is one of the pilot countries that's looking at developing natural accounts for ecosystems. So he's been working on that, and we're doing some work with the UK government on helping them with their national capital accounts. On the risk side, myself and Barbara come more from the corporate side. What I found is that my skills are best actually in translating some of the complex science into actual financial and economic risk to companies. So I try and work to make these things digestible to executives. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. Barbara McCutcheon, she spent 20 years at a forestry company based in the States. It's called Western Data, and she's been leading our value chain work. So we have a wide range of skills around these three areas. Yep.
What kind of risks do you cover?
So yeah, mostly when we're talking about this, we're talking about sort of how ecological change affects corporate financial profit. And we do a little bit. Yes, yes, entirely. So most of that, we do a little bit of work on the impact side. So how does a new plant or a new mining operation affect risk? We also look at changes, climate change, and things at landscape scale also. And that's become an increasing part of our work, is getting out of the site and where the 20 acres you're disturbing, but more looking at large landscapes and greenscapes. We've done work all over the world. Doing a little bit of work in Colombia right now with Icoral. Are you familiar with Icoral? Federico Botero, a small consultancy. Icoral again is a Colombian, but he's based in Medellin as well. He's developed some contracts with Grupo Argos, and that's a lot of the work that we've been doing in Peru. This is the presentation that we made in Cartagena, where Richie was at. And essentially, what they have a piece of land on near the Canal del Dique, and essentially looking at developing that land, and they have a lot of risks, both because they have some endangered species in the area. They're right next to Parque Rosarios. But the biggest risk is actually from the sedimentation coming down the Del Dique Canal. And they're in a difficult situation in that no matter what they do on the site, those risks are going to persist. These are some of the companies we've worked with. Let me talk a little bit about our work with the Chamber of Commerce and with the UCSD. When we were at the World Resources Institute, we developed some training materials to help companies understand risk as it relates to biodiversity. And we were using an ecosystem services framework. So looking at changes in the environment, how that changes ecosystem service delivery, and then finally how that changes financial statements. We've been improving that training and giving that training. We're going to be doing that with the Chamber of Commerce in May. And there's certainly some opportunities to do that training elsewhere in the world with other partners. We've also been working with the Natural Capital Coalition, and if you don't know it, they're a group that's trying to do what Waves is doing for the government, basically help companies understand how they can actually account for natural capital risk in a consistent way, very similar to the greenhouse gas protocol. Since there are, how many modelers are in the room? Ecological modeling. Species modeling. Okay, your modeling is in. Okay. Okay. I guess Michael and Steve do a lot of different modeling. We've used Invest, we've used Aries, and a lot of the other tools that are out there. This is the publication that we had a small hand in developing that surveys some of the tools that are out there. Most of the work that we're doing increasingly is more complex, just developing individual tools for individual companies. Let me give you one example of some of Steve's work. This is a model of that he developed actually for the Gulf of Mexico, looking at the grouper species. And what he did was model not only the biological species, but then how fishermen are actually responding to those species. And what he found was that over time, over the 15-year period, we're seeing the actual salmon catch, this is actual catch rates, sort of the economy So it shows a steady improvement and some decent management. What the model also found was that the fishing was located up here, but it was biomass down here. And this is the actual real growth rate of the species, because most of the models that were out there weren't including the economic side. And what it's done is it's forced the NOAA and the authorities to begin to change the way they're monitoring, not just the fish catch, but looking at a broader ecological view of what's out there. And that's one of the things that we're doing a lot more work on, is trying to bring these economic models and these ecological models together. So I could talk a little bit more about some of that, and I think that's really some of the things that we've been thinking about doing is really can we apply the same idea to a terrestrial landscape? If you have, for example, changes in water management, how are individual economic actors going to change their behavior, and how is that going to change water flows? We're also thinking about doing this. We're having some conversations now with one of the certification organizations for agricultural products, so coffee and palm oil. The question that we're asking is, as individual plantations move towards more biodiversity at the site, at what point do you get ecological change at scale, and can we begin to model that out and really show that ecological benefit? There's a lot of the certifications, as you all know, we really don't have a lot of great data at that landscape level as to what that change on the farm means. Again, these are the two publications that we helped develop the Move at WRI. It shows a lot of our methods, which I could certainly talk about. I think the corporate ecosystem services review. Have any of you seen these? Have been familiar with them?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. You use them? Oh, I'd be curious to hear. Let me just take a break. How is your experience with it? And if it's bad, tell me bad, because I've changed what I do, because I don't like what I wrote 5-6 years ago.
For experiment with FM, it's a big company of hydroelectrical dams. We start a strategy of biodiversity and ecosystem services. Use that guide.
Okay.
We are in the phase 1.
Phase 1, you're just scoping. Okay.
I just read about this.
Okay. Was there one or two things in there that were useful to you?
For the next time of the project.
Okay.
The point of view of the company, understand the core of the business. I think it's the most valuable.
No, and I think that's. I'll talk a little bit more about sort of how we're changing our methods using those. Natural capital accounting. So last week at the conference, at the ACES conference, we had a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion about standards, about standards for measuring and classifying ecosystem services. The classifications of ecosystem services in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment are coming under attack. The United States EPA, surprisingly, has actually developed what we think is the best system out there. It's based on the final ecosystem services concept. And what it does is it separates out the ecological and the economic production function. So if you're doing ecological modeling, what it does is it determines endpoints of final ecosystem goods and services that are at the point where the natural environment, where the process comes out of the natural environment, becomes part of the economy. So, for example, for fish, what that is where the fish is actually caught. That fish, when it's caught, comes out of the environment and becomes part of the economy. So the ecosystem service is the fish when it's caught. For carrots, for example, the FEG, the final ecosystem goods and service, isn't the carrot, because the seed and all the tractors and labor and capital needed to plant and harvest the carrot means that too much of that economic function is inside the measurement of the final ecosystem. So the ecosystem service to the farmer is actually the quality of the soil, the quality of the air, the quality of the water, the quantity of the water, the timing of the water when it arrives. So it changes the way we look at ecosystem service. And what that means is that it's, one, easier to value. It's easier to translate into economic terms, and it's much easier for sociologists, ecologists, and economists to understand what each other is talking about. Go ahead. Sure. Let me. I didn't prepare this presentation, so I'm going to get to it a little bit. I'll provide you all the details. Just to back up, so we had the conversation about the final ecosystem goods and services classification system, and then we had a conversation about remote sensing and about data and the need for data. USGS launched their latest ecosystem map, their Roger Sayer. It's a global map of ecosystems that I think 250-meter resolution. We were involved. Sustainable Flows was involved in a project with the European Space Agency to look at ecosystem services and what opportunities there are for the remote sensing community to really drive research in this area. And then we also talked about natural capital accounting and how the classification system, the mapping, and the data really needs to come together on a set of systems. We're involved with the project with the UK government. We can talk about the Natural Capital Coalition. We've also gotten involved with setting their standards. And I'd be curious to get your reactions to this final ecosystem goods and services classification system and the challenges that Columbia is having in trying to standardize this thing. So just to go back to the conversation on FED, on final ecosystem goods and services. So you've all seen this table from the DNA. Very confusing. Anybody that looks at this knows you're about to confuse, especially a corporate executive or a government official. Any of you that have done economic valuation, it creates a tremendous amount of overlap because you're looking at things that are in the economic production function, things that are in different stages of the ecological production function. There's a tremendous amount of confusion. So both of the EPA tried to get this to this, and they've done that. It's not finished, it's not perfect, but they're a long way there. What they did was they said, well, what we're trying to do here is to get to a standardized system of measurement. It needs to be flexible, but we need to standardize. So they wanted to avoid the double counting. They wanted to distinguish between what's in nature and what's in the economy. You can't confuse those two things. We need things that are at that transition point. This idea of beneficiaries, a lot of the work on ecosystem services, including the stuff that I did at WRI just a few years ago, didn't really mention who the user is, what are the benefits specifically. This forces you to define this. And theoretically, as it's been tested, theoretically it makes going to larger geographic scales much easier than smaller geographic scales. And there's this direct link to national accounts. So what they've essentially done is taken this idea of defining, giving a number to different ecological classes, category, a subcategory. So, for example, you might have a category for terrestrial tropical forests, and within tropical forests, there might be a subclass. And then you have to define the beneficiary. The beneficiary might be, in this case, people using water downstream. So it might be a company or a community, and what their particular use is. You have to define that community and how they're using it, what they're using it. And with that beneficiary, this actually links up to international economic classification. So if you're a company or if you're an economist that's trying to figure out different economic policies and what the impacts are going to be, you can actually now begin to use this these numbers directly into your current input-output model. And that's the conversation going on right now in the U.S. government. One agency has decided to use this system in their cost-benefit analysis. So whenever someone says to them, give me the cost benefit of this change in the law, they're going to include not just economic and health changes, but also the changes to ecosystems and value. I hope I've confused you a little bit. I can give you more information on this, but let me just give you one more piece. So the idea then becomes that you have natural capital, there's an ecological production function, and that creates a final ecosystem. And these flow into either the nation and these acronyms up here are basically the classification systems that economists use to classify different economic activities. So you can actually track how a change in law or a change in investment runs throughout the entire economy all the way back to human life. So what the system allows you to do is a FEG system, and just to give you another acronym, there's the National Ecosystem Classification System as well that was built on the FEG framework. So you have flows to intermediate goods, to direct goods, and then directly to humans. So in some cases, you might have a timber or wood products that come out of the economy and go into producing timber for homes. They also might go directly in. You also might have, for example, food that comes out goes directly into the water. What's not measured at all are these direct goes to direct beneficiaries. There's this whole piece of the economy that's not directly being measured. It's called the informal economy. You bring a lot of that in. And that's essentially how we're getting to relate FEGs to ecosystem classification. So a lot of the discussion at the ACES conference was about these systems and could you actually bring them together, bring together the standards on ecological classifications and economic classifications, so that this information and data becomes more usable to economists as well as other social policy.
Those ecosystem classifications are putting taxes or countries.
You mean these are here?
No, there's a classification system as whole. Say, for example, just in the USA, or do you have an example from the different countries, South America?
Yeah, so there are three that I know of that I've been told I can talk about. There are two others that are planned. One was done in Peru by Conservation International. I can give you information on that. They were working under the WAVES program as well. And they took the CICES system, which CICES, that's the European Development Classification System for Ecosystem Services. They integrated that with the FEG system, and then also with the International Industrial Classification System. So they took this system, which measured ecological systems. They took the FEG system and added the beneficiaries to it, and then they added essentially the economic side to it. Not sure if it's going to work yet, but everybody seems to like it. It's also been used. It's also the U.S. government, the EPA Office of Air, has declared it's going to start using it next year to measure all of their cost-benefit analyses. And then it was used also in Baru. We used it in Cartagena, and we're talking to our partners there, Grupo Argos, about publishing something on it, which hopefully we'll do soon. Those are the only three cases that have been used. The U.S. EPA is going to have 6 test sites this year. They're going to start using it at, and the UNCIA, which is the United Nations Statistical Agency that works with WAVES, is going to start reviewing it to see if they should use it. So that's kind of just a quick kind of rundown of the different kinds of projects that we're working on. I guess the last thing, just to talk a little bit more about the remote sensing data and information needs. We had a lot of conversations about that, and as part of the GCOMON project that we're involved with, we're going to be making some recommendations to the European Space Agency. So I'd be curious to get some feedback from you about what you'd like, what Columbia needs that would be useful to your work for remote sensing.
So far, we have been working with optical and radar batteries. One of the main issues here is going to be the topology learning. Because, for example, for radar, you have a good optical elevation model. So it is difficult because in those areas, we have a lot of clouds, rainforest. So optical imagery is not very useful, and the temporal resolution is quite low. So we saw that we are working in a project with radar imagery. But we also have some limitations because I think now it's one big project in another institute, and they use a lot of remote sensing for deforestation purposes. So they are trying to calculate like every 3 months the rate of deforestation and trying to highlight what are the main spots of biodiversity loss. Here in the institute, like different groups, all the groups have a GIS person or team that is in charge of developing maybe algorithms or any protocols for analyzing the needs. For example, I work in the Bachelor project and are another for another ecosystem environment because the also has people that work with GIS and also so it's depending on the ecosystem, we are separated, but we also try like keep in touch. For example, the new satellite project, Lorita, I'm trying to share like techniques that we are developing in each group. Like maybe so far, look, what we do here.
There are some experience about specific projects that is the structure of the university. There is a laboratory for that, and all different topics about biodiversity, program or information.
I think I like a lot the approach of risk because I think can bring together different stakeholders. With risk is a very strong word to me because I don't know farmers, CEOs of these companies here we can talk together about risk. And for me this kind of approach can afford afford that.
Support.
Yeah, a lot of projects. Here we're trying to develop some projects with this kind of approach.
¿Qué tipo de métodos usan para evaluar riesgos? Are the different methods or techniques you're using to look at risk? Are you using it from a financial or economic side? Or?
I'm just learning.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
My
No,
stage
that's
is
good.
learning. I don't know a lot of risk,
Okay.
qualitative. Think about it, but no how much.
Now that's actually where I was 7 years ago when I started at the World Resources Institute. Was we just said, okay, let's just create awareness in companies about ecosystem services and how they create direct risks, because we knew that eventually the climate adaptation community was going to be looking at risk and using ecosystem services as a way to do that. The two things to look at that we're looking at is one, there's a company called TrueCost, TRUCOST, and they've been doing something called environmental profit and loss statements. which are very complex models that they develop to try and measure how much water, how much carbon, how much land is built into products. And they've told Puma that they have $300 million of risk in their supply chain. Basically, it's things they're not being charged for, they could be charged for, some of those externalities. There's another technique out there that's trying to use something called value at risk, where you actually figure out if you have a particular site or a particular product that is at risk because of climate change or ecological loss, whether it's biodiversity or water or something else, and figure out what percentage of your stock price. Actually, very simple mathematical techniques. A high school student could do it and analyze that. So I would encourage you to. I'd be happy to share some ideas with you about what we're doing and how it might be of use to companies here.
It's like this technique or the framework to build up a production function, including like the like transforming ecosystem function into production function or translating the natural function into an input into the production function is a very powerful framework in order to support the decision-making process and modeling in front of different scenarios. So you have the economic risk, the political risk, but also having a numerical value and the possibility to build up models with numerical and quantitative methods that can be like translating what we do here into a language that is more universally understood by the private and economic agents, because that's very frequent. The problem that you say is conservation or maintaining the quality of a particular ecosystem is very important, but when they ask you why or what is at risk if I take these kind of decisions, there's the problem with you have some difficulty explaining why it is a rational decision to maintain or to include these considerations into your development function and like in the current moment and for the future, so you can really front of different areas.
No, I guess the hope of some of the people that are working with this final ecosystem goods idea is that if we can really define those well, those final goods and services, ecologists, economists, sociologists can all talk about the same thing. Water to my community at the FEG, quality of soil for farmers. Everybody knows what that means, but you can't have a conversation with an economist about nitrogen levels.
From the economic theory, you have to create value to work when you have like this land or this fish and there has no value until you harvest it. But that's like this move that is has been considered in the economic theory for 200 years. When you could work on it, you can evaluate it. Before it is like it's a possibility, it's a potential, but how do you really transfer it in a way that is useful for the private decision?
Do you think here in Colombia, what would be more powerful? Would it be a waves-like project where you value the forests, or would it be more effective maybe to look at the value of water to companies in Colombia?
It would be more desirable in the first approach, but in practical, from a practical point of view, maybe the second approach is to evaluate like the volume and the provision and the reliability of the supply function, like for you or for like find a common language is easier. It's not easier, but not to say it's easy, but it's like a more straightforward process.
I agree with that. Concas, there's a lot of tools in Colombia. Concas, one of them is planes de ordenamiento de manejo de cuencas hidrográficas. Basin management.
Okay.
Maybe this approach is much more practical. So we can get together a company upside stream and downstream.
Even like start estimate compensation from between people who are downstream and upstream, and develop even payment for ecosystem services model, and evaluate really with more precision or the value of the transfers that you should do in order to keep the flows of ecosystem services to the different members of the basin, for example.
Be curious. I know there've been a couple of projects to do that, to develop a payment for ecosystem services for water in Colombia. Or what's the status? I'd be curious to get an update.
Yes, but for example, when you pay some taxes, one part of it has to go, like the municipal tax,
Okay.
has to go to the restoration and conservation of recreating areas, for example.
Sí.
But you have a constant by 1%. That's a good point, but it's like a good beginning, but you really don't have the way to estimate the adequate value. You just say 1% because it's the result of a political struggle, but it's really that enough? It's really that for every case? So you can really go to a more specific process for each particular case, not just 1% for everyone.
Makes sense. Yeah. Some of the just just curious, just to kind of explore what kind of over the next, I guess, 5 years, does the institute have a plan or a strategy for national data sets or more databases or systems or surveys?
The biodiversity system information. So they have locations of the species, and there is a website where experts of different people can go check and also can comment. Maybe, okay, this is the right distribution, or maybe you have to be careful here. You are not assessing the right value. I think that is like one of the main platforms that the institute has built up in the last 5 years.
And is that being used by the private sector as well as the public? Or?
It has free access.
It's a partner.
Okay.
But my comment was not about not the state, but the national that is an excellent tool for the laboratory of that together. Because it's modal and the proposal it's modal different kinds of variables about the need to be climate change, after potential issues, all in order to the information for the
Okay.
into that we are trying to add some into the risk management. So, for example, and
Great. Well, in terms of the business biodiversity connection, that's obviously one of the things that we spend a lot of time working on, is trying to make these things useful to companies. And it sounds like the data you're providing is right there. I'd be curious. I mean, we've had a couple of conversations with Icoral and some other institutes here and organizations in Colombia about some training on some of the natural capital coalition protocol or some new ideas we have about valuation of risk and biodiversity. To the degree that there's interest in Humboldt and exploring, those ideas and how some of the ideas that we have might be of use to Colombia and Colombian enterprises. We'd be curious to have a conversation about those as we go forward. And that definitely the final ecosystem goods and services classification systems. I'd be happy to share that with you and keep on talking about how you think it's applicable to what you're doing.
A lot. For example, in one case of BM, this big company, I think a big opportunity is to change the production and the use of information. Because information produced by that kind of company are for mandatory specifications. Yeah, requirements, legal requirements, and that's it. It's a lot of cash. When you tell that, the CEO thinks, okay, we spent a lot of money, and this information is not a big, valuable active. It's not enough. And we have to change that kind of thinking. Yeah. Yeah. We have to change that.
Yes, but it's raw. If you don't have the information that we don't know how to use it, you have it, but you really don't have the way to translate it in a useful form.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Our goal is to try to identify which are our objects, conservation objects, in order to join that with conservation strategy. To go with the conservation process that they are established for the company. If they destroy or they make some kind of impact in the region or some kind of process, they have to compensate in a different way. So we make this partnership and have very, very interesting results. So now we have identified some issues, some places that this company will invest and try to compensate this area. And this is one of the best examples of the
No, the mitigation hierarchy is something that we're actually hoping to use in Baru as well. Whether we'll get there or not, it's not required, but it's something that Grupo Argos has used before in other places.
it's a win-win agreement. We are exploring different areas, but also the company is getting a growth portfolio to design, set up strategies where they operate and where they make exploration. And I don't know, maybe you could go to the idea of
We are working also with another partner for and you have to do and also assessment on biodiversity. The final goal is to have like a management plan for conservation or recreation So we're asked to do that. And but the thing that I find more difficult is that we have different communities there. So we have indigenous communities, also peasant communities, and also like the private sector with more money and buying a lot of land. And I think the community just make it mention, for example, trying to access system services for biodiversity using remote sensing, for example, there are I would say we don't have as much information as we would like to have. We have to use a lot of information, new ones, and that's I think this is the problem also not only there. When you try to do things, you don't know as much biodiversity as you would like to have. You don't have as much as registry, for example, records on species. Exactly. You don't have physical information as much as you want to have, and also that's the problem with the access to areas because there's a lot of different actors, and it's difficult to get access to them. So I would say that this is one of our problems in country development, not only there. First of all, I think that's a really good exercise that we put together like different actors, different parties. We would like also to work with NGOs, local services in the area. So we are not going to work only with the private sector, here, but also different actors in the area. So I think this is one of the most important things that the city is going to be doing. But about the data, you try to access ecosystem services by using, for example, remote sensing. We all know that it's the same that when we're trying to access, for example, land use, but there are a lot of things that are invisible to the sensor. So you really have to go to the area. You have to talk to local people. You have to do surveys. There's a big thing, not only assessing from with the remote sensing technique, but also you have to go there and try to do something with the people so that you can know which are the ecosystem services there, who really use them, or which are the limitations to use them. That be, for example, the land, who owns the land, or human.
No, we had some very similar conversations with the project we were working on, and tried to explore if there were any opportunities to do some research in that area. And it might be one of the proposals that we put to ASA is to do a research project on that. There are only a couple of techniques for really identifying if there are even populations in some remote areas, night lights, trying to correlate census data with even fires at night. And that's basically it. There's one project going on that the IUCN is doing. They're in the country of Georgia, and they're trying to develop. They have some very detailed census data that they did. They went on the ground and collected it. And this was for boreal forests, and they're trying to develop a model from that with all the satellite imagery with the census data that they can take to other boreal forests. If they know where the populations are, they can model out roughly what kind of direct uses, benefits people are getting from those forests. I mean, a similar thing might be interesting to explore here. And the mitigation hierarchy, I hear that over and over again, is that the data just isn't there. And even if there's good environmental impact assessment data, oftentimes you don't have the spatial data that you need to implement the offsets. And that's many countries throughout the world have implemented an offset requirement without requiring EIAs to collect the right information. So you get to that point Have you found that companies are willing to invest in the research, or do they expect that Humboldt has all the information about the biodiversity in the country?
That's a good question. I believe that well, they are willing to invest in even among commerce, but I really don't know how much. At least there is an intention to use the initiative, at least like first in space and there's more focus in data that goes by biological data or gathering and the second phase, which for teams, we have more engagement with planning and
Okay.
more
They need some information and some guidelines to incorporate but they need to understand what the traditional things we're not a company, we're not we do not have the same nature. So they need to understand that we have public institutions that we have some governmental like and afterwards they try to make sometimes they identify which are the main like branches or topics that we can work with them. For example, then not only the company, they only start from area
Mm.
and after the first phase they work for the service. But it's like getting to know each other
I think a bigger percentage, I don't know, if the current biodiversity and ecosystem services policy in Colombia. Right, the framework is socio-political system. Yeah, very interesting approach because we have to fit all together. But I think the missing part is kind of we have to code, we have to value in terms of other things. I think this kind of tools and approach is very powerful for that kind of.
And that was exactly the conversation at the conference last week, was that we can't do valuation properly because we're not measuring the right things. We don't have a consistent way of measuring and quantifying the natural environment. Because no one had developed this system until now. And the analogy that was given was that in 1920s was the first time the gross domestic product, Producto Nacional, was ever done in the United States. And what they measured was trains. How many trains were sitting in the train stations? Because if they weren't there, they knew they were out moving goods and the economy was strong. If they were sitting there, then it was bad. And that's how they measured the national economy. And that's where we are right now with biodiversity and ecosystem services. We've got a lot of box cars and the bug is there, or we have a satellite image. We're not sure if the bug is there, but what does that mean to me? And I think with this system, I think we can take it to the next level. So I'm really excited about the FEG system. I think it works for companies. The biggest surprise to me about this FEG system was in Baru. There were a lot of biologists who came from different disciplines who were fighting about what the metrics should be. The metrics, the indicators, the environmental measurements. And when we said the company is interested in water to their plant, risks from adaptation, and we gave them a couple of ecosystem services, they said, well, here's how my environmental indicator, my environmental measurement relates to that. And everyone just lined up. And all the ecologists came together around a single measurement. And it changed how the scientists worked. And that was the biggest surprise to me. Sorry? Yeah, so it was could probably even send you a presentation on that. There was a sediment, so it was fish, because we did evaluation study, again, $1.6 million of US dollars of fishing is done in the area. So the fish, the reefs, quality of the reefs for tourism, and then we also looked at water, so access to fresh water, and the last one was beaches, quality of beaches. So the sediment plumes that were coming down Canal del Dique, especially during El Nino, we did some modeling around sedimentation and found that during El Nino years, during drought years, the sedimentation levels were destroying the reefs and causing fish populations to decline. And then, as similar with the other things, those were the three that we used, and those are all fake. So we can value all of those things too, and they could also be linked into the national accounts, regional accounts, if there's a way to do that. And the companies understand this. If I want to have a site, I need water, I need the beaches, I need the coral reefs for tourism, I need the fish. Because if the fish go away, all the communities that depend upon it, and all the restaurants in Cartagena that depend upon the fish, it's very easy.
About modeling, courses, these are not structured, so you need to adapt each model. So there are different concerns. Say for example, there are some concerns that maybe the Centenario Fund concerns would be maybe different, and so you need to adapt those models.
Yeah, I'm not an ecological modeler. I could make something up, but I don't think. Yeah, I'm the person. I mean, modelers tell me that. I mean, there are. It's still hard from what I'm told, but it's getting easier, and more information is going to be out there. And my guess is that in 10 or 20 years, modeling is going to be a much simpler process. Most of the PhDs, I mean, a lot of that work that you saw that Jeff did was from his PhD. That's being used in other places now, and a lot of this information is becoming public, and people are just taking modules off the internet and building more complex models. Yeah, I wish there were more modelers in the room. You must model. No. Yes, that actually is a FEG. That is the final ecosystem good and service, those cultural values. And I mean, the evaluation techniques that are used for that are common, and they involve a lot of surveys. You have to go on the ground and basically ask people, which I presume you've been doing or do. And the question becomes is how do you translate that into risk to the company, which really comes down to permitting and right to operate, which is one of the things we wrote about in the Corporate Ecosystem Services Review. And I think the value at risk technique, which hasn't been used extensively, I think there's only one case where it's been used in that way, could be really valuable because you could actually translate that into either revenue streams, so how much revenue are you going to lose. In the case of permitting, it would be the time that you're going to be required to the interest loss there, and you can put that into a direct financial term for the company, or just into shutdowns. plant just shuts down. I was working on one project in Kazakhstan, and it was a company that owned a coal mine, and wanted to build a power station and wanted to use coal. And we took a look at that, and what we did was they used net present value financial valuation and said, well, if we do have a carbon tax of $80, that means nothing to us if we used right now in financial terms. We said that's true, but if the regulations put in place, you're going to lose $20 million a year every year, or if the regulations force you to shut down the coal plant, you're going to spend 2 years changing. That's going to cost you $200 million. So we were actually able to convince this company to build a plant that could be gas or coal, separate the coal company from the gas company, so they could begin to export the coal. That's not a solution to the climate change problem, but it's those small steps based on a kind of financial analysis that I think make a difference. I'd be happy to share some of those techniques with you. And I'd be curious to see how some of these cultural values are valued in Colombia. I think it's one of the most fascinating fields is what are those values and how are they diminishing? And how do we preserve them? Because I think it's at the core of a lot of the work that we do. Yeah.
It's not academic. It's like network of how we get together and get ideas. So,
How? Well, I can certainly give you my email and we can talk by phone or Skype. I'd be happy to keep on doing that. That's the easy way. I'd be also happy to lend a hand with the work that you're doing with the ESR. I could do some just for free, just to help out because I'm interested. I plan to be in Bogota a few more times in the coming years, so I'd like to stop by again. And let's just keep pursuing some different ways of working on these things. There are a lot of things I think on the final ecosystem goods and services framework that I'd be happy to send around. And yeah, we could look for some opportunities to collaborate with one of the companies or on a publication or some of these other projects. Yeah. And hay otras personas en Sustainable Flows que actualmente que en verdad pueden hablar español. Será un poco más fácil. Yeah, I think it's an improvement of it. So I think is there a pen that could use? It would be an easier way to do it. So if you look at the way that we think about it is essentially the classification of ecosystem services in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment that I used to use just 6 months ago, and the one that the Europeans developed called CITES, developed by a guy named Roy Haynes Young, essentially consider any benefit that comes out of the ecology or from the economy as being an ecosystem service. All the final ecosystem service goods and frameworks I would say, essentially when something comes out of at this transition point between the ecology and the economy, then it's the final ecosystem goods and service. So if you're looking at carbon sequestration, that's actually an ecological process that occurs through various means in the ecology. It's not a final ecosystem. Now, you might want to measure it because you have a regulation, whatever reason. Denitrification of water or soil is not a final ecosystem good and service. The EMA says it's a service, but it's really an ecological process. You also might want to measure that. So that's the main distinction, is you're only looking at this transition point. Likewise, an apple is part of the economy, because in order to get an apple, you need the seed, you need the machines to plant it, you need the machines to harvest it, you need to transport it to the market. So the apple you buy in the market is not a final ecosystem, it's part of the economy. The soil, the water, the air quality, where the apple is grown, that's a final ecosystem. So you need to be at this transition point, and you also have to have a user. So it's at the end of the ecological process where there's a user. So the user is the farmer for the apple. The user for the fish is the fisherman when he catches it. The water user, if you have the same body of water and you have one beer company and you have, one indigenous community, it's a different final ecosystem good and service. One ecosystem good and service is the water for the company, one is the water for the community. So it makes those distinctions, because those distinctions matter when you go towards measuring the flow of that good and service throughout the whole economy. It took me about 4 months to understand that, and I kept going back to this. But it makes a big difference, because now when I go and I talk to people, I'm immediately putting things into different boxes and saying, this is what we should measure, this is what we should focus on. And this you can communicate to anyone. The quality of the soil to the farmer.
About what is the concept? We have a lot of concepts in country. We have the concept of patrimony, but also that for position, but not natural capital. And it's the same, but it's different. And how can we use the natural capital in the national economic system? In most cases, only the social, economic, or monetary.
Yeah.
What is the methodology of approach to the national capital?
Yeah. So the report to do this, this is what WAVES is trying to do, and what the United Nations Physical Division is trying to do, is to basically take this natural capital over here, and this concept of natural capital, I don't like personally. Maybe I'll like it in a few years, but it's really a general term that just refers to all the natural processes that are going on. So again, there are these ecological production functions that provide things. Now, what's been used up until recently is people have just measured the existence of ecosystems and said that's the capital, and that has a certain value, and they've estimated that value. And people have been questioning the techniques of that valuation, I think, for good reason. And there are people who are, there are groups who think any valuation is wrong because you're going to capitalize nature and turn it into a product that's going to get bought and sold by people who drink too much coffee in New York City. There are other people who criticize it because the science is weak. So I think we have to dispel those two myths and find a system that works and recognizes the natural cultural capital that's associated with it. The discussion that's going on right now, that I was involved with last week, was just about that. Was about how do we find a system in a classification that works. Because right now, we're confusing all these things. We're confusing natural capital with the economy, with nature, with change that. If anybody here, who in here is economic training serious? That guy. So, okay. Any economist will tell you that in order to get the value of something, you have to ask somebody what that value is. You need a price, and you can't get a price unless somebody buys it or sells it or says, "I will pay so much money." The system that's being used to measure natural capital doesn't look at who the users are. It's missing from the equation, and that's what this brings in. I was just asking the economists, but can you measure something without there being a user? Can you measure the value of something without there being a user?
Not really.
You hired the right man, whoever hired him. So that's what this system does. Is it gets you to this final ecosystem of goods and service with the user, and then you can link that directly to your national accounts. And what you can effectively pull in is you'll have what you want to measure with each thing is all the things that currently are not in the economy. So just those ecosystem services that are out there that are providing these things. And that's what there's a 200-page report that's being passed around the EPA right now. That's going to be and there are I've had 6 so far ecological modelers that are going to start using it, and some of the people who do cost benefit analysis. So I think in the next 2 or 3 years we're going to have some examples. Peru is kind of using it, but not at this level. These are the kind of conversations I would love to begin to start in Colombia, because I think you've got the experience with some of the payments ecosystem services that there's enough understanding that there's value there and we can make a transaction. And the growth that's going on here, particularly with some of the mining sites. To the degree that you guys can take that forward, I think Humboldt would be the perfect group to take that discussion forward. So I will keep in touch so I can send these reports and this information, and I'm happy to answer any questions. On the phone, are there any comments or questions? No, they've all. Well, thank you again. I'll be around for a little bit longer if you want to talk more, but please just got some materials here, business cards, so let's keep in touch.
We're good.
Thank you. Yeah.